Now, after you've taken a breather and feel proud of yourself, we're going to move on to the server. But before we can move on to the server, we want to send some messages to the server through the remote event we had. So let's go quickly get that. So we have the remote event. Now we just want to fire the broomstick remotes, whether we should activate or deactivate the ability. Pretty simple. If it's true, it means activate. If it's false, it means deactivate. Now we're going to move on to our server and get some variables like replicated storage, fan mode, and our remote event. Next, we want to check for when messages are sent over from the client. So my bad, I named this the wrong thing. The first parameter is always the player, and the second parameter is the message sent, which I'm gonna call broomstick function. So if broomstick function equals true, and that simply means activate the skill. If broomstick function equals false, and that simply means deactivate the skill. Let's go ahead and test it. We can print activate and then here print deactivate. Activate. Perfect. It works like a charm. Now activate. What do we want to do when we activate it? Well, we want to first create the broomstick, then position the broomstick, and finally weld the broomstick. But if we were to do these things individually, it would literally take us 15 minutes. Okay, maybe 10 if you're good at this. Or we can take the back alley shortcut, which uses Moon Animator. Now, Moon Animator is the best plugin I've ever used in my whole life. Whoever created this, thank you. But first, let's get our broomstick. Link in the description. By the way, I did not make such a wonderful broomstick. It was actually made by this person. Credits to them for actually making this video possible and making our lives so much easier. So this broomstick, I'm just gonna destroy the thumbnail camera. As you can see, it comes with beautiful effects. If you want, you can keep them, but personally, I'm gonna delete them just for the sake of this video. Now we have our broomstick. Perfect. If we were to test this broomstick though and anchor it, and then run it, we notice that the broomstick falls apart, and that's simply because they are not welded together. So let's quickly weld that by adding a weld constraint and adding stick 1 and stick 2. Now weld constraint just welds objects together and makes it so they're like one object under physics simulations. So let's test, and voila, perfect. Next, we insert a character. It can be any character. I'm just gonna insert myself just cause. Now we position the broom any way we like. Now I am really liking this. Looking pretty good. And finally, using Moon Animator, Easy Weld, we weld these two things together. So first, just cause later on I know I want to animate the stick, I'm gonna click for torso instead of using humanoid root part, and then the stick, and join in place. Now we should have a motor 60 called stick and torso. We just move it to stick and call it player weld. Then we just set its part 0 to 0 and move our magical broomstick to meshes. And even though the magical broomstick's name is so magical, I'm gonna shorten it to broomstick. I know, a tragedy. So let's get meshes so we can get the broomstick. Local meshes. Now we get our broomstick and we simply set the broomstick weld. Did I misspell something? Apparently I did. We simply set the broomstick weld. It's part 0 to our character's torso. So let's get the character. Character.torso. Of course, this requires you to be an R6, but if you're an R15, you can weld it to something like the lower torso, the upper torso, anything you want. Just preferably something that doesn't move around much. To make everyone in the server the same, like R6 or R15, we first save the game to Roblox. broomstick tutorial basic mechanics dot dot dot. Save that. And when it's done restarting, you just go to Avatar and select R6 or R15, whichever one you are, and save it. Going back to this, it's welded to a torso, and later in the video, like maybe part 3, we're gonna animate it. Knowing that ahead of time, I set the broomstick's parent to our character. So let's go ahead and test it and see what happens. I activate the ability. Oh my god, it is beautiful. I think I'm gonna cry. Wow. Perfect. And now if for whatever reason you can't use the back alley method, a tragedy, there is still hope, because instead of setting this here, we could set the broomstick. First, let's get the humanoid root paw. Instead of just setting the weld, let's say you can't use Moon Animator for some odd reason, you can manually set the position of the broomstick to whatever you like. So here I set it to the humanoid C-frame, then I moved it down a little. Then because it's rotated the wrong way, I just rotated it the right way. And then you can go ahead and use fan mode to weld it by going to part 0, the broomstick, the part 1, the humanoid root part, the torso, and then the parameter 3 if you want it to be animatable, which is yes, then true. And if you can't use fan mode, like you've been hit twice, you're like, Josh, please help me. How would I ever continue if I can't use either of those? Don't worry, I got you. Because instead, you can also copy this out. You can create a new Motor 60, so that's parts all in part 1, and then for the weld seal, just set it to the position of the broomstick relative to the humanoid root pod, and that should work. Okay, moving on back. Now we have the broomstick, but it doesn't get destroyed when we deactivate the ability. So let's quickly do that. First we get the broomstick so we can manipulate it. And now we check if the broomsticks exist. If said broomstick exists, then we destroy it. Like that. Let's go ahead and test and see if this works. I activate the skill. Beautiful broomstick. I deactivate the skill. Nothing happens. So its parent is the character. It's, oh, I see. As we can see, in replicate to storage meshes, it's called broomstick with a lower stick. So just rename that. Activate. Deactivate, and it's gone like magic. It's absolutely beautiful. Time for the funnest part, making us go vroom through the air, actually allowing us to fly. To allow us to fly, we use something called linear velocity, and I almost feel like I'm spoiling you guys now, because yes, there is a fan mode function for linear velocity. If you appreciate fan mode as much as I do, just smile. Give a compliment to a random stranger today. Fan mode, the linear velocity. It's just the part you want to be affected by the linear velocity, our humanoid root part, and then the velocity, which would be our humanoid root part, where our player is looking at, times the speed. So if it's 200, we'll move 200 steps per second. But the thing is, if we were to just test this now, we would activate the linear velocity, but only in the direction we activated the ability in, just like the align orientation. So I'm moving towards myself. Okay, there we go. And even when I try and rotate, I keep moving in the same direction. To make it update constantly, what we can do is go into our trusty local script. In here, under the align orientation, we can fire the remote and call the function something like loop. So if broomstick function equals to the string loop, then go ahead and update the linear velocity. To manipulate the linear velocity, we must first get the linear velocity. But what if there's multiple linear velocities for some odd reason? So let's name the linear velocity something unique. Broomstick fly. It's unique but certainly not pretty. So now we have the linear velocity. We can manipulate the linear velocity by setting its vector velocity. to where our player is currently looking at times 200 speed. And then we can also delete this because it's not really needed. But we only want it to update the speed if said linear velocity exists. And if it doesn't, then just return end. And now we can destroy the linear velocity if said linear velocity also exists when we deactivate the ability. Let's recap. We created a broomstick, created a linear velocity, named it, then we updated it on every loop, and finally we destroyed it when the ability is deactivated. Let's go ahead and test this. And I am not moving at all. And when I deactivate it, it says attempt index nil with vector velocity. Oh, if linear velocity, okay. If not linear velocity, then return end. Wow, I'm flying through the air so fast. Ah. But if this bothers you, the fact that we're just falling, we could add an animation. How do we do this? Well, first, time for the big reveal. The bonus was actually an animation. I pulled one animation from part 3. So the animation we do now is going to be very basic. In part 3, dive deeper into animation. So animations, and then we can create an animation track. Color whatever you want. Now, how do you animate this? Well, first, insert your broomstick back into the character. Set the player world part O back to torso. Open your animator of choice. If you can use animator, you can do that, but I sadly cannot. Tried so hard. Then we can name this whatever we want. And as you can see, the stick is its own individual part that we can rotate and move. And after animating yours, you can have whatever animation you want, but make sure it's looped and the priority set to action. And you can have this cool animation. I made mine look like it's breathing a little bit just for that extra effects, you know. And then all you do is publish to Roblox, name it anything you want, writing, submit, copy set asset ID, and post it here. Next, we simply just play the animation and the skills activated. Okay, we need some spaces here. Also, don't forget, get the animation. Local animations equals replicated search animations. And then we load the animation with our humanoid, which we also have to get. Then we play our loaded animation. And after we play the animation, when we deactivate the ability, we want to stop the animation. And we can do this by looping through all the animations that are currently playing, and then stopping the animation that has the same name as our animation. Let's go ahead and test this. And there's an error. Broomstick is not a valid member of... Oh, I see. So while we're animating, I forgot to put the broomstick back into meshes, and I also forgot to set that back to no. I activate the skill. And there's another error when I deactivate it. Get plain animation. No, you can't do this. But when I tried to deactivate it, I looped through every animation that was playing, but I misspelled this by one letter. It's not get plain animation track, it's get plain animation tracks. Then I play again. As you can see, the animation works perfectly. And I deactivate, it works. But wait guys, it's not the end of the video because I forgot something very important. Cursor. If I were to zoom in and then swivel around, you can see the cursor is visible, and I don't know why anyone would want to swivel around. But I guess those pro gamers playing your game because you're just that guy would want to. And also when we're moving, you can see the cursor just hopping in and out. We want to prevent that so it doesn't reduce the quality of your game. Back in the local script, very simply, we check if our focus distance is less than something like 2. So if it's less than 2, we just assume you're in first person mode, because when it's 2, it's really close to the player. If it is, then we set the visibility of our cursor to false, but we don't want to just spam this, so we only set it to false if it's not already false. And then we return n because we don't need to use math to figure out the position if we're like in first person. However, if the person zooms into first person, the cursor becomes invisible, and then they zoom out. We want to make sure the cursor becomes visible again. So cursor to visible equals true, but we don't just want to spam this, right? So we only want to set it to true if it's equal to false. And let's go ahead and test this, and that should get rid of the weird glitches and bugs. I zoom into first person. Wow, no glitches and bugs. Even when I do a 360 no scope, nothing. Wow, that is so cool. And the last thing we need, of course, a terrain to play on. Dun dun. Holy, these things are massive. Dun 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 dun. And like that, we finished with part 1. I hope you guys enjoyed. Stick out for part 2, which will be coming out pretty soon. Thanks for watching. Can't wait for the next one. Bye.